Great. So, really warm welcome from me. I'm Kusalasara, and just really nice to spend a bank holiday here at Dharma Night at Buddhist Centre. So, we're continuing our series. We've been looking at stories from the Pali Canon. So, the Pali Canon is a vast collection of works, actually. It's the written records, the earliest written records of Buddhism. Several hundred years after the Buddha's death, the oral tradition was finally written down. So previous to the written tradition, it was passed on orally by people with much better memories than we have nowadays. They didn't get their memories messed up by swiping on Instagram and all of the things that distract us. So we can have a certain amount of confidence in the quality of the oral tradition. So the story, each of us doing one of these talks has just chosen a story or an episode from the Pali Canon. Mine is called Daniya, the herdsman or the Cattleman. And it's from the Sutta Nipata, which means, this is all a bit technical really. So a sutta is an episode, is like a teaching or a chapter maybe. It literally means thread. A sutta means thread. And even more kind of nerdy fact is it has the same etymology as suture, which is the medical word for stitches. So it's amazing that some of the words that you find in Pali, you can see direct correlations between them in our language. So sutta means thread, and the Sutta Nipata is poetically called the selection or section of the suttas, and they're. So often what you get in the Pali Canon is either a kind of narrative. So often they start with a story, like, thus have I heard. So what it is someone who knew the Buddha recollecting a story. So thus have I heard, and then the Blessed One, while he was staying at blah, 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 and it unfolds like this. But in the Sutta Nipata, there's very little narrative and very little context or background. So in this story, Daniya the herdsman, he just goes straight in, and I'll read you some of it in a minute. So there's no contextualization. It was a fine spring day, and the Buddha was walking in northern India. None of that. So you go straight into Daniya the herdsman talking. And our teacher, Sangharakshita, he's been known to say that you should treat Dharma as literature, or the suttas and sutras. So the sutras are the Mahayana and later texts. So you should treat them as literature, and you should treat great literature as Dharma, which is an interesting way to approach your reading. So it's not that hard in this one, I don't think, in this sutta, to approach it as literature. It's very poetic, so it's sort of in the form of a poem. So we've got these verses, we've got these couplets actually, or couples of verses, and it's even in the same form as some English poems. So it doesn't rhyme, but what you've got is one voice and then another voice. So you've got the herdsman, Daniya, he says a verse, and then the Buddha says a verse. And then Daniya says a verse, and the Buddha says a verse. And it's not exactly a conversation. It's a bit more like, when one person asserts something and then the other person asserts something. So they both just keep asserting their side of things. It's not an argument either. Anyway, you'll hear a bit more about it when you'll get a flavour when I read some of it out. And why I chose it is it's not wordy or listy. So it's a lot of Well, what the Buddha wanted to make sure is that what he had understood was, i.e. his enlightenment, was available to other people. So he was very methodical. He taught the practice. So if Buddhism is anything, it's a set of practices whereby to train your mind towards and eventually to realise enlightenment. So there's this like really practical quality to many of the Buddha's teachings, and so there'll be long lists of methods, and you should train yourself thus and do this and do this, and this will lead to this, and this will lead to that. This has got a different quality. It's a drama, and it's got a sort of poetic and existential quality. So it's like two people saying, "This is how I live," and then near the end there's a shift, which I won't spoil the story yet, but it's very bare, and it's very I think existential, as in the Buddha's he's not teaching, he's not saying do this, do that. So Daniya the Cattleman says, I live like this, and the Buddha says, I live like this, and they keep sort of asserting how they live. I probably won't end up reading you the whole thing, but the first verses are, Daniya the Cattleman says, the rice is cooked, my milking done, I live with my people along the banks of the Mahi, my hut is roofed, my fire lit, so if you want, rain god, go ahead and rain. Then it just says, the Buddha. Free from anger, my stubbornness is gone. I live for one night along the banks of the Mahi. My hut's roof is open, my fire out. So if you want, rain god, go ahead and rain. So it continues in that vein that Daniya, the herdsman, says something about his life, and the Buddha comes along and subverts what he says. So, and apparently, I wouldn't really know about this, but there's lots of word plays in this, in the original Pali. So, so where the Buddha says, where's it? Oh, so where Daniya says, my milking is done, the word in Pali for milk, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm afraid, is kiro, let's say. And then where the Buddha says, my stubbornness is gone, the word in Pali is kilo. So there's lots of puns, basically, which we will not be able to find amusing or grown at even, and depending how one receives puns and wordplay. So there's this playful aspect which we'll probably not get that much of a flavour of. So the setting. So there is a commentary which apparently was written. I can't quite work out who wrote the commentary, but the elders. So perhaps it was the people who wrote, rather than who were there and listened to this story and passed it down. I think it's perhaps the people who wrote the text down for the first time. So there is a commentary which gives some contextualization. So the Mahi River is in I think it's got a new name now. It was in Bihar, northern India, and apparently it's very prone to flooding. So that's the situation. We've got Daniya. He's secured his roof. He's feeling cosy. He's got his work done. He's about to have a meal, and so there's this. He's saying, "I'm ready now. If it rains, I'm ready." Another one, he says. I might as well say this one. He talks about his wife. He says, "My wife is compliant, not careless, is charming, has lived with me long. I hear no evil about her at all. So if you want rain god, go ahead and rain." So there's always this refrain. If you want rain god, go ahead and rain. And the Buddha says, my mind is compliant, released, has long been nurtured, well tamed. No evil is to be found in me. So if you want to reign God, go ahead and reign. So we just have to remember that traditional Indian values of that time would be this. His wife, it's like everything in his life is exemplary. His cows, his cattle are in the right place. They're well fed. His house is in good condition. His wife, it sounds like they have a good marriage. Has lived with him long. He still finds her charming, and then the Buddha comes along and says, well, that's your wife. My mind is compliant, released, has long been nurtured, well tamed. No evil is found in me. So if you want reign God, go ahead and reign. So we've got these three things happening. We've got Daniya, well, three characters, let's say. We've got Daniya, we've got the Buddha, and then we've got the rain god. So Daniya, he's very satisfied with his life. He's pleased with himself. And I mean, part of the reason that I like this text is the sort of things that he likes, I like. So I like feeling like I've done a good job, and everything's sorted. I've worked hard and it's had an effect, and I feel relaxed, peaceful, secure. Yeah. So that's basically what's happened. He's sort of pleased with himself. Let's say a little bit self-satisfied. But it's attractive, the life that he's describing. Do you know what I mean? There's something so wonderful about if you've been outside and you can see the rain clouds coming, and you just make it indoors in time, especially if you've got a place where you can hear the rain on the roof. Do you know what I mean? Like that cozy, like, yes, I'm so cozy and I can hear the rain outside. So there's this quality of security. But actually, he's a bit complacent. So within it, there's nothing wrong. He's not bad. He's not saying anything bad about anyone. In fact, he's rejoicing for the qualities of his wife. He even says, my sons live in harmony. That's what more would a parent want? Free from disease. So he's describing like probably the best human life, one sort of well-deserved. He would have worked towards it, but he's limited. This is what we can see from him, and this is what the Buddha is like subversively kind of trying to show. He's limited. He's not got an evil outlook. He's not bad. There's no malice described, but it's limited and complacent. So then the Buddha's coming along. So what's the Buddha doing? Anyone want to just sort of describe what the Buddha does in this?
He's using the human body and mind as a metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he's do you want to say a bit more about that?
Is he trying to get the herdsman to concentrate on his own development and his own well-being, rather than look outwardly at his wife or his home?
Yeah. So that's really nice. He's using it. He's using the same language that Daniya is using, and then he's making it a metaphor, turning it into a metaphor, or for his own realized mind. Yeah. Any other thoughts about what the Buddha's doing, Nadia?
Focusing on his inner life, so rather than like in contrast to Daniya, which is about focusing on externals, to evaluate how good his life is. The Buddha's saying, actually, I'm free of anger, I'm free. His liberation is dependent on his internal transformation, but transformation is inner life.
Yeah, that's also really good. Yeah. So he's kind of just like saying, if you just turn what you're saying in this direction, it looks completely different. So he's not destroying, he's not knocking down everything that Daniya says. Do you see what I mean? He's not saying, oh, that's a load of old rubbish. He's just saying, yeah, but I'm like, you're like that, and I'm like this. What Daniya, so that's Daniya and the Buddha, and then the rain god. What does the rain god represent? Any thoughts? He doesn't feature as a character, but he's referred to. What? So if you want rain god, go ahead and rain. Yeah.
So tough times?
Tough times, yeah. Anything else? I mean, exactly. So rain can be like quite serious, and anyone who lived along the banks of Mahi would know that. Yeah. I'm not looking for anything complex. What else? What would?
Worldly wind, maybe.
Worldly winds? In what way?
Just he's, like you say, he's quite happy with what he currently experiencing, but maybe he's indicating that he's also prepared for whatever's going to come along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, and I think there's a sort of quality of bravado actually. You know, like sort of someone going, "Come on, bring it on." Mm-hmm. It's a bit like that. Like I'm ready, but Daniya's just a bloke. And then the rain god, like if you think about what devastation can be wreaked by weather. I mean, apparently this day and age, this is not what the news would reflect, but the number of weather-related deaths per person in the world is way lower than it's ever been. So if you live in like modern architecture has meant that we're much more protected from the weather than people would have been in the Buddha's age. So weather represents not just discomfort in the way that we tend to experience it, or inconvenience. So it wasn't that long ago I went to visit my parents. They live in the countryside, and the rain gods had really rained quite a lot, and trying to get somewhere, and every time we went down a road it was flooded at the end. So it was just like, okay, turn around, let's try this way. No, don't turn around. So it took us ages to get there. You know, so what? Our house was fine. So the rain, but what the rain god, what I think it represents is something that you can't control. You can't do anything about the weather. You can't stop it from raining. You can't decide how much it's going to rain. You can't decide where it's going to rain. You can't decide when it's going to rain. And so what is that a metaphor for? It's not just a metaphor. It's one of the things that human beings have always had to contend with. And, our myths are full with floods, aren't they? The stories full of how do we deal with floods. So there's the literal response, but it also represents everything in life that we can't control, like the forces of nature, everything that we can't design and regulate. So Daniya is saying, I've got my little world, and do you know what? It's working out really well, and I think that I'm a match for the rain gods. But if you think about it, just for a moment, like he's really not, and none of us are. I don't know if you've ever because as hinted, my parents live in the countryside, and often we have to like move bits of wood and I don't know, countryside things. If you ever lifted up a bit of wood or a log or something, and there's like a nest of mice or something underneath, it's like that Robert Burns poem of like they think they're so cozy, and like they found like themselves a really good protected thing, and all it takes is one clumsy oafish human just to pick up a log, and that's their little protected world just completely exposed. And Daniya's a bit like that. He thinks he's secure, but the Buddha's sort of just like poking him, isn't he? He's like, your values, maybe he's saying your values are okay, but look, like I don't think that it's going to work. So I think there's two things that's wrong with what Daniya is saying. The first is, the first is that the world he's created is vulnerable and limited. So he's got a lack of perspective, and this is indicated. Sorry, let me just think how I want to say this. So one of the things that the Buddha says, Daniya says, I live with my people along the banks of the Mahi. And then the Buddha says, I live for one night along the banks of the Mahi. And so our teacher, Sangharakshita, there's a seminar that he gave in 1980 where they're discussing this and many other topics. But our teacher, Sangharakshita, says that the Buddha is saying two things. So the Buddha is saying, when he says, I live along the banks of the Mahi, the Buddha is saying something about how the Buddha lives. So what's that? How does the Buddha live? If he says, I live for one night along the banks of the Mahi, what kind of lifestyle does that indicate?
Very itinerant.
Yeah, itinerant.
Transient.
Transient, yeah. Yeah. Doesn't have a base, doesn't own a home. Yeah, so that's one thing. So not attached to property. Then what Bhante points out, he says he's also saying something about how Daniya lives. And what he's saying is that we all live for one night along the banks of the Mahi. Does that make sense? What we think is permanent is not. That we're all just camping. So what's happening here is what Daniya thinks is, it's a bit like having, when you're asked to do a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, and then also you're thinking about your retirement and like all of that very complex set of actions we have to get to reach our goals, and all of that is based on a stretch of time that we think is quite a long time. Like how am I going to live my life all these years? And yeah, if you think in that way, retirement seems. I mean, I don't think in that way. But retirement seems. It's not that. Yeah, it seems a long way off, a sort of a distant goal. But if we think, I live for one night. I live for one night on this earth. So actually, interestingly, apparently, the word Mahi means the name of the river, but also has got a relation to the word earth. So we're camped for one night on this earth. And if we think in that way, like how does that change our perspective on our experience? I mean, I definitely, when I think like that, like, oh, I'm here for one night. What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to... there's a kind of sweetness actually to that. Like, I really want to live my life well. I'm just here for a short while. So So Daniya's thoughts are flawed because he's not taking in impermanence and he's not taking in the forces of nature. He thinks he's protected himself against them. The other thing that Bhante points out is even if we could like live a life of security, and some people seem to, have a happy, healthy life from beginning to end. Things go well, everything they touch turns to gold. They're gracious, lovely people to know, actually. But even if we could be like that, what the Buddha is saying is that there's so much more. Even if things weren't precarious, there is so much more that this confrontation, so that's how I think of this, these sets of verses, as this confrontation. And the Buddha's saying, I'm here about growth. You, Daniya, you've done okay, but this is better. There's way more. There's this whole world perspective. You're just a little mouse in a burrow. There's a whole bigger perspective available, and that's what I'm living. So there's this kind of energetic confrontation. Actually, that's what I really like about this sutta. It's a kind of like I said before, existential. It's almost tantric. So if you know the tantra, it's very much tantric Buddhism is very much about energetic exchange from practitioner from teacher to student. So you get this feeling from this mysterious exchange. I mean, the other thing that's also mysterious is like, let's be literal about it. Where's Daniya sitting? Where was the Buddha? Where did he come from? Like, is he just like a voice at the door? Is he a guest in his house? Is he has this got this kind of mercurial, magician-like quality of just like turning up in his in Daniya's life, uninvited in a way. So even if we could secure everything, peg everything down, for instance, later Daniya says the stakes are dug in, immovable, the new munja grass halters well woven, not even the young bulls could break. So if you want rain God, go ahead and rain. So even if we could dig the stakes in, everything's immovable. That's not the point either. There's more. That's what the Buddha's saying. Do you know the story of, there's a story, I can't find the source of it, but about the Buddha and a king. It reminds me a bit of this. So the story is the king says to the Buddha, look, I've got a palace, I've got dancing girls, I've got an army. How cool is that? I'm really happy. You don't look like you've got any of those things, so how can you be as happy as me? And the Buddha says, okay, yeah, maybe. Could you sit still and be happy for an hour? And the king's like, yeah, probably. Yeah, that sounds good. And then the Buddha says, could you do that for 6 hours? And the king, he's quite an honest king. It's like, that's probably a bit harder. And the Buddha says, could you sit still without moving, perfectly happy, blissful for 1 day and 1 night? And the king's like, definitely not. I need dancing girls, or I need to play some sport, or entertainment. And the Buddha says, well, I can sit in complete retreats and meditate all day and night for 7 days on end in perfect, supreme, unmovable happiness. And then the king realizes what true happiness is. So it slightly reminds me of that it's like we're looking for the same things, but we want to be happy, we want security, we want this sort of quality of protection, and we look for it in things that are too limited to give us that. They sort of delineate, even if they're successful. So they're precarious, but they sort of delineate the terms of our happiness. I remember having a conversation, I've probably said this before in Dharma Night, but anyway, with someone, and he said, do you know what, I can guarantee that if I go to Berlin and go to a techno club, both for the weekend, go to a techno club, take this much ecstasy, I am going to have a great time. And I thought, yeah, you've done that, you know it is true, you are, but you're putting, you're absolutely defining what your happiness is going to be. Like if you take that much ecstasy, you can't have any other kind of experience. You can't have an experience of subtle, release from meditation. You can't it absolutely dictates what kind of experience you have, and that's probably going to be good. It might go wrong. Do you see what I mean? So what the Buddha's saying is, if you don't grasp at that or that as your strategy, if you can just keep a bit more open, then you could go further than you realise. You can move into the next phase that you can't even imagine. Your mind can grow so that those qualities are part of your mind, not things that you rely on externally. So this is what you were saying as well. So does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, interestingly, the Buddha's saying the Buddha's not saying he's indifferent to the rain. We don't take it like that. We know that the Buddha, there are different places where the Buddha taught. They would settle down in the rainy season, and the monks, the bhikkhus, would build shelters. The Buddha had a shelter. There's even architectural remains of that shelter. So the Buddha's not saying, what's the point of staying dry, for instance. The Buddha is saying, don't think that your hut is more than it is. It's just a hut. It's not a place of security. It's just a practical way to stay dry. And it doesn't say anything, it doesn't mean anything else for you. So it's not a setting for it's not a place for you to identify with. And it's not just that kind of householdery life that can do that can make us sort of feel settled and complacent. It can happen in any situation. We have to be on guard for it. It will happen if you get involved deep in your practice in Buddhism. If you became a monk or a nun, that's perfectly possible. You think you go forth from the worldly life, and then you just settle into some kind of religious institutional complacency, like these are my duties, these are my practices, this is what I do. And what we need when we're complacent is someone coming along and giving us a poke. So there are two disrupting characters in Buddhism. One is Mara. So you've encountered Mara. Does anyone not know who Mara is? Yeah, okay. So Mara is sort of like a devilly kind of character. And he comes along when someone's about to make progress. And he says, no, don't. He feeds doubt and unconfidence into someone who's about to make a breakthrough. So he appeared just before the Buddha became enlightened. And he's the kind of voice that says, oh, why do you think you can do that? Like, what made you think you could grow in this way? And then you get other characters in Buddhism who come along and disrupt your life when you're feeling complacent. And there's a great text called the Vimalakirti Nidesha, where Vimalakirti sort of comes along and disrupts all of these quite famous characters in the Buddhist tradition and says, your view of life is limited, like, come on, you can do better. So there's this quality of subversion here about not settling and not having an identity. And even a wandering life, you could do that. I mean, there's an anecdote about our teacher. One of the things that often is talked about in our movement is, lots of us, order members in particular, are very English, and then Sri Ratna's been built up a lot in England, and come to the Buddhist centre here. We get tea, we get biscuits, so it's all very sort of culturally English, and we might feel very comfortable about that. And then, so our teacher really encouraged us to go and live in other countries, which I'm afraid to say I haven't done. Terribly English. Just so that you get that feeling of discomfort, of not feeling settled and comfortable in the way that you practice. And then apparently someone said to Bhante, I've lived in this country for a long time, and I've lived in that country, so now I don't really identify as being any one particular nationality. And Bhante very pokily said, well, that's your new identity. So, when I went travelling, I remember meeting people like that. They seemed like perpetual travellers, and I think one of them even boasted, I'm a citizen of the world. And you could feel his ego kind of like pulsing off him. Yeah. So it's not just a danger for the householder's life. It's the tendency of the human mind. Okay, so I promised a bit of drama, didn't I? So there is a plot in this. there things do move on. Is there anything I want to say before that? Where did I write that? Or maybe I'll just evoke one more thing. So the Buddha, remember I said there's 3 characters. So the Buddha isn't the rain god, so he's not got this quality of destruction. He's not here to sweep everything away. What he's doing is he's saying, if what you really want is security, then you're going to have to be okay with not resting, with not needing security. So there is a kind of security, and the enlightenment is often described as being the farther shore, in a way, sort of a place of safety. But that place of safety has to be the kind of mind that doesn't need safety. It doesn't need to protect itself because it has no. The delusion that creates a sense of self is no longer there, so that this quality of needing protection isn't demanded of the mind, which is the only actual safe place, so the only refuge. So what am I trying to say? So the Buddha's he's not taking everything away, and often in Buddhism I think this is really important. We're not destroying. There is a destructive aspect of enlightenment, but it's remembering that it's the values that we really, really want aren't to be found in the places where we look for them. But if we can hold on to the value, then and bring that to our spiritual life. Do you see what I mean? So let me just, what's a good, what would be the right metaphor, an easy one to... Maybe I'll just go over the point about security. What I'm trying to say is that there's a higher meaning behind all of our desires. if we let that in, so that it's not that we want, it's not the wanting that's the problem. It's the way that we fix the wanting. So, or what we fix it on. And I don't know if you've ever met someone who's just not quite as bought into the same thing as you are, where, and I think that's what the Buddha's bringing. So Daniya's like completely bought into his whole vision of the world, and probably if he met the next herdsman along the banks of the Mahi, they'd either be competitive, be like, oh yeah, I've got more sons, bulls, houses, or they'd be sort of colluding of like, isn't it great? So what the Buddha's saying is, I'm actually not like you at all. Like, why are you even concerned about these things? I mean, I've definitely had that kind of experience on a much lower level of like getting really het up about something, and then someone else being like what's at the bottom? Like, I'm not bought into that at all, and it's really refreshing. It's like, oh, I could not be. Do you know what I mean? Just like, but if you meet someone else who's got the same views, like, you just wind each other up and create this kind of like, or like this kind of like satisfying, yes, I know what you mean, and da, 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 da. But if you meet someone who's just like, then you've got nowhere to go. Yeah, very, very refreshing. So we have all these verses, these refrains, and then, so the final ones, yeah, the stakes are dug in, immovable, the new munja grass halters, well woven, not even young bulls could break. So if you want to reign God, go ahead and reign. Then the Buddha says, having broken my bonds like a great bull, like a great elephant tearing a rotten vine, I never again will lie in the womb, meaning that he's broken the rounds of rebirth. So if you want to reign God, go ahead and reign. Then the voices stop, and the narration kicks in. The great cloud rained down straight away, filling the lowlands and high. Hearing the rain god pour down, Daniya said, how great our gain that we've gazed on the Blessed One. We go to him, the one with vision, for refuge. May you be our teacher, great sage. My wife and I are compliant. Let's follow the holy life under the one well gone to the far shore of aging and death. Let's put an end to suffering and stress. So we don't really see this coming. We don't see like Daniya's like inner working. It's like with the verses, it's not like he's getting more and more in line with the Buddha's teaching. The whole thing is Daniya, Buddha, Daniya, Buddha, Daniya, Buddha, asserting their positions. But then suddenly the rain falls, and we get this complete turnaround in Daniya's attitude. Now, I don't know what it is, but it's a beautiful metaphor of this quality of well, so it's like maybe all of the work's being done in a non-visible way, and suddenly, so Daniya's mind might be softening, we just can't see it, and then suddenly it just takes a little something like the rain for him to hear the rain hitting his heart, or to see the ground, the floods kind of rising up, and he realizes that what the Buddha's been saying is completely true, and he's grateful. It's wonderful. He says, "How great our gain that we've gazed on the Blessed One." So from this rather complacent person, we see someone with spiritual potential, actually, which is really interesting. And I think, maybe actually I'll just see what you make of that the dramatic episode. Any thoughts? Remembering really, I don't know, it doesn't have to be the right answer. Remembering that we're reading this as literature. Is Dharma read as literature as well? So just what effect it might have on you. Or any thoughts?
Maybe when the rain actually does come, he does start to realise everything that he was holding on to will perhaps be taken by the rain, and everything that the Buddha had suggested could not be taken when the rain came down.
Yeah. So he suddenly sees that like the rain as a real threat.
Yeah, and understands that all the things that he was holding on to will be affected by the rain, and all the things that the Buddha had mentioned could withstand such a force, maybe.
Okay, so that's good. So being able to compare, and maybe he could see it in the Buddha's bearing as well. That I don't know, that the rain's coming. He sees the vulnerability of everything he's built up, and the Buddha is presumably unaffected by the weather. He's not sort of going, "Oh, my feet are going to get wet," or anything. Yeah, the Buddha's bearing would be as dignified as ever. Yeah.
So, sometimes I was thinking, when it happens that there is a discussion between two people, and one is keeping his view, he keeps asserting his position. So that's what he basically is saying, but it's not what he thinks. So I was thinking in this instance, maybe in his mind, as the Buddha was talking, he was thinking. So sometimes we have a contradicting thoughts in our mind.
Yeah.
So more of our own versions that talk with each other, but still up to the last moment, he was still saying, no, this is what it is, this is what they think. But something maybe was already going on in his mind as the Buddha was talking, and then there was a spark. In this instance, was the rain that made him speak up, and like his other view
came to the surface or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really good, isn't it? And like I mean, just to take that one step further, sometimes when we know the truth of something, we get even more defensive until we're ready to admit it. So it may be that because the Buddha's sort of, it's not even that he would have sown the seed of doubt. It's like those doubts, because the whole setup is so precarious, like those doubts will be there. The lakshanas, or the marks of conditioned existence, are there in all our experience, that it's impermanent, that we can't sustain our identity without, it's just impossible, and that there is suffering and pain and discomfort. All of that's there. So it's not that the Buddha adds anything new, he just opens it up a little bit more and a little bit more. And that the more that comes in, the more likely you'll be like, no, cows, wife, milk, fire, sort of really trying to defend against it, and then I think that the weather is just this beautifully dramatic thing, isn't it? Like I really like how weather can show psychological, our psychology, or it's just like a Shakespearean play or something. We just bring in the weather to indicate a change of mood. Presumably there will be thunder, lightning, with the rainy season coming along as well, and that defendedness is just not possible to maintain anymore in Daniya's mind. So I'm gonna wind up now. Just a couple more things to say. So one is, like, this is just a point of reflection for yourself. Like, have you had experiences where what you've been looking for in your life, you found it inside, you found it sort of in your interior life, or for example, I first started meditating, and all of the sort of physical pleasure that I used to experience from going to parties, all of that, I was like, oh, I can do this with my mind. I started getting pretty, which is a sort of rapturous feelings. Oh, that's there. I don't need to get it from elsewhere. And then later that turned into contentment. Experiences of like, I completely don't need anything anymore. And what I normally do is go around looking for that final thing that's going to satisfy me. A snack. It's usually a snack, to be honest. Not very imaginative. The right drink, the right combination of snacks and drinks, the right conversation with somebody. That sort of searchy thing. I am looking for contentment, and then sometimes I get it when I stop searching. Yeah. So it's just really interesting to reflect. Like, have you had experiences where what you've been looking for externally, love, validation, security, you can find it in your own heart, in your own mind. It might just be little things, but they're useful information. And then I'm just going to make another suggestion about how we could think about this set of verses, this sutta. It's like, what if the Buddha is part of us in this situation? So what if it's like a psychological dialogue with your own mind? It's like part of your mind is going in this way, and then what if it's just part of your mind is just saying, oh, is that right? Do you really think that? Do you think there's a little bit more? Or like this quality of, it's even like this quality of grace unlooked for. So the Daniya is not looking for a spiritual life. It's just something's just come in from outside. And what if that's possible in our own minds, that we can just let unsought, uninvited, even in the midst of our own sort of good luck, even if our life is going well, can we just admit this quality of like something else that might allow a bigger vision and might allow true freedom, true protection from the rain god and everything that might bring. Yeah, so that's all I want to say. It's nice to read the sutta, so do have a look. It's just, you can just Google Daniya with a DHANIYA sutta, and you'll get it if you want to. Okay, so that's the end of the evening. Thanks for coming. Next week, actually, we've got a really nice evening. So Bajmati, who's she used to teach here for many, many years. Many of us sort of thought she was part of the LBC. She moved away, but she's coming back. And she and Maitreya Bandhu are going to be in conversation around living their order lives. I think it'll be very interesting and probably pretty funny as well. So do come to that. And if you haven't been able to make a donation yet, then please do remember the Dana bowl on your way out.